It is the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War, which started on March 20th, 2003. I dressed for the occasion, believe it or not. This t-shirt says right here, Raisin in the Sun, Arts at NFA. That is my high school, my public high school in Newburgh, New York, 2003.
What, they have a cast of like 5 white kids do Raisin in the Sun?
No. I was the sole white kid in the cast. I played Linder, the real estate agent who tries to convince the black family not to move from Chicago out to the suburbs. And I was a sophomore in high school.
Weren't you upstate? I thought you were upstate.
I'm in Newburgh. I'm 60 miles north of the city. I've told you this before. I grew up in a very, very diverse town.
Oh, that's right.
It was majority minority school district. But anyway, 20 years ago, we were in rehearsals for this play in my high school. This shirt is in very, very good shape, all things considered, that I've had it for 20 years now. But as we were rehearsing this play, yes, the Iraq War started 20 years ago today. And this was a really formative experience for me. I was 16 at the time. The Iraq War is really what made me a politically conscious person, especially being a kid that age with a father who's, been in the chat a few of our shows. Some of you guys get an idea of the kind of guy he is. When he gets an idea in his head, he can't let it go. So he was obsessed with this news all while it was happening. And that obsession really permeated the entire household. We were all very consumed by the day-to-day goings-on of the Iraq War. Just as he's very consumed
this
now.
Keaton's origin story.
It's my origin story. Well, now you could see. I mean, it's funny. He calls me whenever we're going to do a show, and he knows we're going to do a show. He says, "Are you talking about the Nord Stream pipeline later?" I said, "Well, not necessarily, unless there's something new that happened with the story that we can comment on." He says, but he's like, "Well, I don't understand why everybody's not talking about this all day, every day." I said, "Well, because, there are other things happening, and if there's no news on that front, why would we cover it?" But, that's the kind of guy he is. So the Iraq War was front and center in my minds, especially in the early days of it. And especially as a teenager, I grew up in the 90s. I grew up in the end of history. It was right here, right now. That was a period where, yes, there were shenanigans going on around the world. Iraq, obviously.
What are you, 37?
36. I'll be 37 in December. So I just turned 36 a few months ago. Yeah. So I grew up in a period of relative peace. Not that we weren't fucking with the world as we always have, but the 90s were a time of relative stability, at least here at home. 9/11 obviously shattered that, but it was, a political unifier for obvious reasons. But then to see the Bush administration just totally squander all of the goodwill that they had been gifted and take us down this path that was just so obviously a road to ruin. And there were so obviously going to be so many hundreds of thousands of corpses that just lay in their wake. It was just a very tragic situation and just a horrible situation. It was my first experience thinking about this stuff in a way that felt real, that didn't feel like it was under glass, like you were reading history. And so, that more than anything else really informed my political development. That's why I said I've never been radicalized, because I went from not paying much attention to this stuff, as most 14, 15-year-olds don't, to having very radical anti-war political views, right? I mean, there was never a second where the Iraq War made any sense to me whatsoever, even as a teenager. Even in September and October of 2002, this is 1 year after 9/11, when you started hearing the war drums start to beat. It took about 5 or 6 months for them to build support for the Iraq War. You started seeing it appear on the headlines in a late summer, early fall of 2002. And it wasn't until 6 months later that the shock and awe campaign formally launched. But we figure we should come on, since we have some time to kill before our radio spot at 11 p.m. And this is the most people have talked about the Iraq War in recent memory, because it's an anniversary. And I think it's quite ironic and quite chilling that a lot of the liberals who are now reflecting on their ill-advised support for the Iraq War 20 years later are at the same time championing the Third World War. And I sent out a tweet a little bit earlier to the effect of, you have a chance to be right a little bit sooner this time, right? Just look back. The anti-war faction is almost always right. Almost always. 999 times out of 1,000 of people saying, hey, let's try another way, they end up being right. So don't be stupid. Don't be stupid. Try and get out a little bit ahead of the curve this time.
Well, I saw one of the shittiest shit libs I know posting about 20 years ago today the Iraq war started. It was a terrible mistake and it undermined a lot of faith in our institutions. What were you saying at that time, motherfucker? Yeah. Because if you were speaking out against it, I'll eat my hat. Okay, I'm sure you were one of those assholes talking about how we had to go in and 9/11 and all that bullshit. I mean, that was the page everybody was on until Katrina. It was really Katrina that turned the narrative around the Bush administration. It wasn't any specific thing that happened in Iraq. They were cheerleading Iraq right up until Katrina. And once Katrina happened, they started questioning everything about the Bush administration.
You're definitely right that Katrina definitely tanked the Bush administration's poll numbers to the point where they could never come back. But, you know, the war, support for the war was in decline through the 2004 campaign.
Was in decline,
that's why the election was close.
But the
election wouldn't have been close if the numbers stayed where they were at the start. At the start, 70% supported the war.
Right.
And then by 2004, it was down around 50. Right. But it was still, right at 50.
But it was still a 50. And the press really did not deal with the Bush administration like the pack of dunces and criminals that it was until after Katrina. There was a sea change in the way that those press conferences went after Katrina, even in something completely unrelated like Iraq. They were pretty deferential about Iraq up until Katrina. I still remember Jon Stewart. He had a great moment where he was showing the press really hammering Bush's press secretary. I can't remember which one it was at the time. And Jon Stewart showing the clip of the press secretary clearly frazzled, getting just peppered with questions. And Jon Stewart comes back, goes, "Oh, the free press.
Right.
Where have you guys been?" Because it was so palpably different from how they had dealt with the Bush administration up to that point. And today, watching so many people just, "Oh, did you see when he shared a candy with Michelle?" And that's what Trump is taking away from us. That spirit of bipartisanship. Bush was an honest Republican you can have disagreements with. He didn't ruin Thanksgiving. Jesus fucking Christ, did you have a frontal lobotomy? Do you literally have no fucking memory of how tense things were between conservatives and liberals over George Bush? You don't remember how George Bush was a criminal? It was the most criminal administration ever. Only in that case, it was actually fucking true. It was true. And the things that he was doing were not tweets. These were not tweets. This was hundreds of thousands of lives lost because of the decisions of this person. And that's why, for me personally, no matter what Trump says, I never regarded these people with anything other than fucking contempt. Because at the same exact time that they're talking about, oh my God, Russia and porn stars and all, at the same exact time, Ellen's dancing with George Bush. His poll, he's actually in the green with Democrats now. George Bush is now over 50% approval with Democrats. So you're going to come to me and tell me how offended you are about Donald Trump? How am I supposed to take that seriously?
Yeah, not only were the crimes of George Bush, infinitely more severe in every respect, but the media covered his ass in unison, as opposed to now, during the Trump years, the media makes up fake bullshit crimes that Trump didn't do, and they run 24-hour news stories about them. Whereas during the Bush years, yeah, man, and there's stuff we didn't even remember. There's stuff we don't even remember now. In August 2001, pre 9/11, which this was obviously memory hold for understandable reasons, there was a whole scandal that came out that the Bush White House, not a department of this or that, the White House itself would doctor the EPA's reports to take climate change, the words climate change out of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, that ain't hush money to a porn star. I understand that's not as severe as that. But once again, this is just where it comes down to, like, okay, if you actually care about things, if you actually care about the world, how is that not infinitely more consequential? Right? Doctoring the words climate change out of your EPA's reports.
And even the whole attack on the press, really, the Bush administration laid the groundwork for this idea of truthiness, of what is truth. It's, interestingly, postmodern take that the Bush administration had on the idea of the telling of truth. Well, whose truth? Is my truth the same as your truth?
Right.
That was that, and I believe it was Cheney who said people have to be careful what they say right now. This was after we had gone into Iraq, and they're, talking about treason and people being traitors, and people forget that now. That now. I'm going to dig into that for the segment I'm doing on Sunday, but seeing George Bush get rehabilitated at the same exact time that all the blue MAGA people were losing their mind about Trump, I mean, that illustrated where their politics are and what their politics are about better than anything else I can think of. They do not have principles. They do not have politics. They have an addiction to a certain type of media whose business model is to get you angry and to present the world in a very black and white oppositional way. And this really appeals to most people because most people are kind of dumb, empty, insecure, and confused. And they're looking for direction in the absence of religion, and they find a religion in these narratives.
Please clap.